it comes down to two things, right? The SSNIT decision to sort of diversify its portfolio vis-a-vis the act and the mandate that sets them up, and then the actors that are involved in the process, specifically in this case, Brian Acheampong, whom I actually have no relation with, and then, the issues surrounding conflict of interest and due process and all of that. If you take the first one quickly on that, the questions that I have at the back of my mind really is, is this being done? Where's the value for money in it? Was the due process followed at the end, or from the perspective of SSNIT? Were the necessary board and other approvals sought in a way that safeguards SSNIT's, interest in all of this? And I think the gentleman from the Federation of Labor actually raised an important question in all of this. Yes, they can diversify portfolio and do all sort of things in an attempt to make more returns for their shareholders, but for who and why and where? And I think there are questions in there that need to be answered. Then the second aspect of the issue that we're debating here is the actors that are involved in the sale. And this is where a lot of questions also have been raised about, Brian Acheampong and his company and the capacity, and whether or not, like Honorable Okujeto was highlighting a few moments ago, they even had the necessary paperwork at the time the bids were being submitted to even have qualified them in the first place as part of the procurement, processes. But I am worried that we seem, or I think Honorable Mesa, made the claim that it could be right versus is it the law? This law versus morality kind of argument where conflict of interest is actually on those three things that you mentioned, something actual, apparent, and potential, or perceived in that sense. And I think when you look at the optics in and around this deal, I would think that the Minister of Agriculture and his company probably should stay out of this, because the optics for me doesn't sound right.
Doc, in law, the minister is not the same as the company. In law, the company is separate from the minister.
The company is separate from the entity, right? But he also sits in government. He sits in cabinet. Are we saying that there was no undue influence or process, just by virtue of even him being minister, so to say, that could not have affected the outcome?
And that is speculative,
process.
Isn't it?
It is. But it is not something that is not out of the ordinary, because we know how things are done in this country. And it's interesting because, again, if you go back to the UMB case that we were talking about just a few years ago, there were similar allegations that were made back then.
I hosted, I've gone back to play those. These days, that's what I do, Doc. I go back and play some of those things. And I remember the MPP guys who were on this same platform, Newsfile, the things they did to John Mahama as a president, even though John Mahama had nothing to do with the transaction.
Oh, remember there were even claims that Ibrahim Mahama was involved in all sort of things, right?
Exactly. And I can tell you without a shadow of a doubt, with my friend Ejapa Mensah sitting here, that if this was happening in an NDC regime, Ejapa would have sat here and done the same exact thing that Sam Okujeto is doing.
So
you would have said it's morally reprehensible.
Let's be consistent. These things are morally.
The provisions on getting the certificate of the speaker.
Yes.
Aslawusu sat on this platform and repeated it so many times, and I was so bad. And today we are back to that.
I have the certificate of the speaker.
Right.
Except that now I don't
practice your law.
Yes, except that now because I'm in the executive, I don't practice law.
All right. All right. Okay. Yes, Doc.
something, you see the inconsistencies. You see how when one administration is in power, or when the goalposts change, the narrative changes, right? And you begin to ask yourself, who is actually working for who in all of this? So for me, any attempt to close that gaps, and this is what I think Sami was talking about, a law that would tighten the rules and ban, such sales to people that are politically exposed or their entities and companies. For me, I'm all for it, because there are big issues in here where people are benefiting from the state at the expense, you could even argue, of the broader public interest. And I must commend personally Sami and the public interest work that is actually done on this, because but for some of the things coming out, many of us will probably even not be aware of some of these shady deals.